The red bridal veil is heavy, but not as heavy as the secrets I carry beneath it. Outside the carriage, the citizens of Chang'an whisper. Poor Lady Lin, they say. Such a refined flower, destined to be crushed by the iron fist of General Chen. I let a single, perfect tear track down my cheek, catching the light just as the carriage door opens. I look down at my trembling hands, the image of a terrified bride. Inside, I am counting. 1. The number of guards at the front gate. 2. The hidden ledgers Chen Yang keeps in the library. 10. The years I've waited to see this family burn. General Chen Yang reaches in to take my hand. His grip is rough, intended to assert dominance. I let my hand go limp, a soft gasp escaping my lips as if his strength overwhelms me. He smirks, his pride swelling. He thinks he has bought a decorative bird to cage. Don't be afraid, Wana, he says, his voice dripping with condescending pity. As long as you are obedient, you will have everything you desire in this manor. I only wish to be a good wife, my lord, I whisper, my voice cracking perfectly. As I step onto the soil of the Chen estate, I don't see a home. I see a battlefield. I look up at the towering gates of the Yongquan Manor, my eyes wide and watery. To Chen Yang, I am a fragile thing to be used. To me, he is a tall tree I am about to hollow out from the roots. The fragile flower of the Lin family has arrived. And by the time I am done, there won't be a single stone left standing in this house. You are listening to a story on Lotus Tale Studios. Wishing you an enjoyable time. Please take a moment to subscribe to my channel, and if this story touches your heart, don't forget to like and drop a comment. The morning of my wedding did not begin with the joyous chirping of birds or the soft light of a new beginning. It began with the suffocating scent of sandalwood incense and the heavy, rhythmic thud of the seamstress's needles piercing the thick layers of my bridal silk. Each stitch felt like a nail being driven into a coffin, but I sat perfectly still, my spine a straight line of polished jade, my face a mask of serene, terrified submission. Hold your breath, little miss, the head maid whispered, pulling the corset of my inner robes so tight I felt my ribs protest. We must ensure the waist is no wider than a stalk of bamboo. The general likes his women to look as though they might snap if held too firmly. I let out a soft, practiced gasp, a sound of dainty distress that made the maids titter with a mix of pity and amusement. It is quite tight, Nanny, I murmured, my voice barely a breath. But if it pleases the general, I shall endure it. Inside, I was calculating the structural integrity of the room. I was counting the seconds between the changing of the guards in the courtyard below. I was memorizing the weight of the gold hairpins being shoved into my scalp, noting which ones were sharp enough to serve as a weapon if the night took a turn for the worse. My mother, Lady Lin Maihua, stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the pale grey light of a Chang'an dawn. She was the woman who had spent 18 years molding me into the most sought-after bride in the capital. She had taught me how to walk so that my hem never disturbed the dust, how to weep so that only a single tear tracked down my left cheek, never both, for that was undignified, and how to hide a killing intent behind a smile that promised only spring. Wana, she said, her voice like the chime of a silver bell in a frozen garden. The Chen family has no history. They have no foundation. They are like a house built on a floodplain. They have bought our name to give themselves the illusion of stability. Do you remember what I told you? Yes, mother, I replied, bowing my head so low the gold tassels of my crown brushed my nose. A flower does not fight the storm. It bends until the storm has passed, and then it drinks the rainwater left behind. Good, she whispered, stepping toward me to place the final phoenix pin. Her eyes met mine in the bronze mirror, and for a heartbeat, the etiquette instructress vanished, replaced by the woman who had watched her husband's career be dismantled by the very man I was about to marry. Bend, Wana. Bend until you hear their bones start to crack. The procession to the Yongquan Manor was a grand affair. The streets of the city were lined with people eager to see the scholar's Lily marry the Iron General. I sat behind the heavy curtains of the palanquin, the red veil obscuring my vision, turning the world into a blur of crimson and shadow. The air was thick with the smell of firecrackers and the metallic tang of the city's industrial outskirts, the new wealth of the Chen family. When the palanquin finally stopped, the silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The door opened, and a hand appeared. It was a large hand, calloused from the hilt of a sword, the skin scarred and rough. Chen Yang. I stepped out, my legs trembling, a genuine physical reaction to the cold, but one I exaggerated just enough to make him catch me. His grip on my arm was like a vice, intended to be a supporting gesture that was actually a display of ownership. "Steady, Lady Lin," he boomed, his voice carrying to the gathered crowds. "I am not a battlefield. You needn't be so afraid." The crowd laughed. I looked up at him through the sheer fabric of the veil, seeing the blurred outline of a man who thought he was a king. He was handsome in a rugged, unrefined way, with a jawline that suggested stubbornness and eyes that looked at me with the same clinical interest he might give a new horse. I apologize, General," I whispered, my voice caught in my throat. "I am merely, the honor is overwhelming." He chuckled, a sound of pure vanity. He led me across the threshold of the manor, and as my foot touched the stone, I felt the change in atmosphere. This was a house of power, but it was also a house of chaos. The servants were too loud, the decorations too gaudy, the hierarchy too unstable. It was a palace of cards, and I was the wind. The wedding ceremony was an endless blur of bowing and tea pouring. I felt the eyes of the Chen relatives on me, sharp, greedy eyes that saw me as a trophy. And then, there was her. Liu Rui sat in a chair of carved sandalwood, a thick fur wrap around her shoulders despite the mild evening. She was pale, calculatedly so. As I poured the tea for the elders, she let out a soft, wet cough that drew every eye in the room. "Rui, you should be in bed," Chen Yang said, his tone softening in a way it never had for me. "I wanted to see you happy, Brother Yang," she wheezed, her eyes darting to me. They were the eyes of a predator who had found a competitor in her territory. Even if the excitement, it is a bit much for my poor heart. I felt the familiar prickle of a white lotus in the room. Rui was playing the same game I was, but her technique was loud. She wanted pity, I wanted invisibility. I walked toward her, my gait uneven, looking as though the weight of my robes was too much for me. As I handed her the cup of tea, I leaned in, my veil brushing her ear. "The tea has ginger, cousin," I murmured, my voice sweet and harmless. "It is good for the circulation. Or perhaps, it is the lack of fresh air in this room that makes you so pale. I should be happy to open a window for you later." Rui's hand tightened on the cup. She saw the flash of my eyes behind the red silk. She knew. The feast lasted until the moon was high. I was eventually led to the bridal chamber, a room dripping with red silk and the cloying scent of peonies. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't move for an hour. I waited until the footsteps in the hallway faded, until the distant laughter of the drunk generals died down. Then, I stood up. I didn't call for a maid. I reached up and began to disassemble the phoenix crown myself. One by one, I pulled out the gold pins, laying them in a neat, lethal row on the vanity. I stripped off the heavy outer robes, revealing the thin, white silk of my shift. I walked to the window and looked out at the manor. From here, I could see the layout of the inner courtyard. I could see the flickering light in the library where Chen Yang kept his records. I could see the shadows of the guards. I reached into the hollowed-out base of a decorative porcelain vase on the table and pulled out a small, blackened piece of charcoal. On the underside of the bed frame, where no one would ever look, I began to draw. Not a picture, but a map. A map of every debt, every secret, and every name my mother had given me before I left our home. The first name was Laro Hu, the head steward. He owed 3,000 taels to the gambling dens in the North District. He would be my first key. The door creaked open. I dropped the charcoal and spun around, my face instantly dissolving into a look of startled, wide-eyed fear. Chen Yang stood in the doorway, his robe loosened, his eyes dark with wine and a predatory hunger. He looked at me, small, pale, and seemingly helpless in the middle of the vast room. "You look like you're waiting for an executioner," he said, walking toward me. I am only waiting for my husband," I whispered, clutching the front of my robes. He laughed and reached out, his hand closing around my throat, not to choke, but to tilt my head back, to force me to look at him. "Your mother spent 18 years making you perfect, Wanna. Let's see if you're as fragile as you look." "I am whatever you wish me to be, my lord," I said, a single tear escaping and tracking down my left cheek. As he leaned in, I felt the cold weight of the gold pin I had hidden in my palm. I didn't use it. Not yet. Tonight was for the planting of the seed. Tomorrow, the flower would begin to grow. And a year from now, the Chen family would realize that the most dangerous thing you can bring into your home is a woman who knows how to bow. The first morning in the Yongquan manor arrived not with the gentle touch of a servant's hand, but with the harsh, metallic clang of the general's drills echoing from the distant training grounds. I lay perfectly still beneath the heavy, blood-red silk duvets, my eyes tracing the intricate carvings of the bed's canopy. In the dim, pre-dawn light, the carved dragons looked like skeletal remains, clutching at the air. Chen Yang had risen before the sun, his movements brusque and devoid of any lingering tenderness. To him, our wedding night had been a conquest, a task completed, a territory annexed. He had left the room smelling of sweat and cold iron, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my bridal chamber. I sat up slowly, my hair spilling over my shoulders like a river of ink. I did not call for the maids. I wanted this moment of silence to recalibrate. In the Lin household, my mother, Lady Lin Maihua, had taught me that the first hour of the day is when a woman builds her fortress. The eyes of the servants are the eyes of the world, Wanna, she had whispered while brushing my hair a week ago. If they see a victim, they will become predators. If they see a doll, they will become careless. Let them be careless. I moved to the bronze mirror, my footsteps making no sound on the thick rugs. My reflection was pale, my eyes wide and shimmering with a practiced fragility. I took a small porcelain jar from my vanity, a gift from my mother. It contained a powder made from crushed white lilies and a hint of lead. I applied a dusting to my cheekbones, making myself look just a fraction more haggard, just a bit more overwhelmed by the exhaustion of my new life. When I finally pulled the bell cord, the door opened almost instantly. A swarm of maids entered, led by a woman with a face like pinched parchment. "I am head maid Su," she said, her voice lacking the warmth of a welcome. "The Dowager Madam expects you for morning tea in the Pine Pavilion. You are already 10 minutes behind the household schedule." I let my lower lip tremble, my hand flying to my throat in a gesture of panicked apology. "Oh, I am so sorry, headmaid Su." The general, he was so energetic this morning, I found it difficult to rise. "Please, I shall be ready in a moment." The maids exchanged looks, half smirks of knowing amusement. They saw a pampered scholar's daughter who couldn't handle the vitality of a real man. They saw a weak link. They didn't see that as they dressed me, I was reading them. I watched the way Maida stole a glance at my gold filigree hairpins. I noticed the way Maidby winced when she moved her left arm, a hidden bruise, perhaps from a heavy-handed overseer. I listened to the rhythm of their gossip as they braided my hair. "Did you hear?" one whispered, thinking I was too distraught to listen. "Laro who lost another 50 taels at the leaping carp last night. He'll be skimming from the pantry budget again this month." "Laro who?" "The head steward. My first target." By the time I reached the Pine Pavilion, the sun was high enough to burn the mist off the koi pond. The Dowager Madam Chen sat on a raised dais, her eyes as sharp as a hawk's. Beside her, looking even more deathly pale than she had the night before, was Liu Rui. "Daughter-in-law greets mother," I said, dropping into a curtsy so deep and graceful it was a silent rebuke to the dowager's own unrefined posture. "Sit," the dowager snapped. "In this house, we do not waste time on flowery gestures. You are a Chen now. That means you are responsible for the harmony of the inner court. Rui has been unwell, you will see to it that her quarters are kept quiet." "I shall do my utmost, mother," I murmured, taking my seat. I kept my head bowed, my eyes fixed on the steam rising from my teacup. "Brother Yang says you are very quiet," Rui said, her voice a thin reed of malice. She leaned forward, the scent of bitter herbs clinging to her. "Perhaps too quiet. A manor this size requires a firm hand, not a wilting willow." I looked up at her, my eyes swimming with sudden, watery brightness. I only wish to learn, Sister Rui. I know I am not as experienced as you in the ways of a great household. Perhaps you could show me the accounts. I find that numbers are a comfort when the world feels too large." Rui stiffened. The accounts were her stronghold. She and Laro, who had been bleeding this manor dry for years, hiding the evidence behind her medical expenses. The accounts are far too complex for a bride, Rui scoffed, glancing at the dowager for support. You should focus on your embroidery. But mother, I said, turning my gaze to the dowager, my voice small and pleading. My father always said that a woman who cannot count her husband's wealth cannot protect his legacy. If Sister Rui is so ill, it is a crime for me to let her shoulder such a heavy burden alone. The dowager looked from me, the picture of filial piety and naive concern, to Rui, whose face was flushed with a very sickly rage. The dowager's greatest fear was being cheated. She didn't trust Rui, but she hadn't had an alternative. Until now. She has a point, the dowager mused, tapping her long jade nail guards against the table. Rui, give her the secondary ledgers. Let her see if she can find the discrepancy in the silk shipments from last month. If she fails, she goes back to her sewing. Rui's eyes flashed with a hatred so pure it almost made me smile. As you wish, mother. After the tea ceremony, I retired to the small library near the koi pond. The ledgers were brought to me by Laro himself. He was a man with a nervous twitch in his left eye and fingers that were stained with ink and the smell of cheap tobacco. The ledgers, mistress, he said, bowing low. Though I doubt a lady of your refinement will find much interest in the price of charcoal and grain. Thank you, Steward Laro, I said, giving him a shy, distracted smile. I'm sure it is all very dull. I shall likely fall asleep over them. The moment the door closed, the shy smile vanished. I opened the books. To an untrained eye, the numbers looked legitimate. But my mother hadn't just taught me etiquette, she had taught me the scholarly cipher. My father had been a man of logic, and he had raised me to see the patterns in the chaos. I worked for hours, the only sound the scratching of my brush and the occasional splash of a koi in the pond outside. I didn't look for big thefts. Big thefts are easy to catch. I looked for the shadow coppers, the small, consistent roundings up in the price of salt, the spoilage rates of grain that were 2% higher than the market average, the gifts to officials that had no corresponding letters of thanks. By noon, I had it. Laro, who wasn't just gambling, he was laundering money for a grain cartel in the north. And the signatures authorizing the shipments weren't his. They were Chen Yang's. My heart went cold. This was bigger than a household theft. This was the reason my father had been silenced. He had found the link between the military and the black market grain trade, a trade that kept prices high while the common people starved. A shadow fell across the ledger. I didn't jump. I didn't hide the book. I simply looked up, my face shifting back into the mask of the overwhelmed bride. Lord Su Huai stood at the entrance of the library. He was dressed in the deep cerulean robes of the Imperial sensorate, his presence like a cool breeze in the stifling heat of the manor. He was a friend of my father's, or at least, he had been the only man brave enough to speak at his funeral. Lord Su, I whispered, rising to curtsy. I did not know the sensorate was visiting today. I am here to discuss the border logistics with the general, he said, his eyes scanning the room, settling finally on the ledgers in front of me. And I find the general's new wife doing the work of a clerk. It is an unusual sight. He walked closer, his gaze dropping to the page I had been working on. I hadn't hidden my notes. I wanted him to see. The numbers, they are very confusing, my lord, I said, my voice trembling. I was trying to help mother, but I fear I've only made a mess. See. I cannot make the grain totals match the transport seals. Su Huai leaned over, his hand resting on the edge of the table. He was close enough that I could smell the ink and sandalwood on his robes. He looked at the numbers, at the specific pattern of shadow coppers I had circled. His eyes sharpened. He looked at me, and for the first time, someone saw past the powder and the lead. He saw the precision. He saw the trap. Lady Wanna, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. A girl who can find a needle in a haystack should be very careful. Sometimes, the needle is poisoned. I only wish to be a good wife, my lord, I said, looking up at him with wide, watery eyes. I want everything in this house to be perfect. Then you are in the wrong house, he replied. He reached out and closed the ledger with a soft thud. The Chen family does not want perfection. They want a shroud. If you continue to pull at these threads, the whole cloth will unravel. Are you prepared for the cold that follows? The winter in Chang'an is long, Lord Su, I said, my voice steady for just a second. I have already learned how to keep myself warm. He stared at me for a long beat, a flicker of something, respect, fear, crossing his face. He bowed slightly. I shall leave you to your confusion, then. But remember, the sensorate has a long memory. If you find anything else that confuses you, I am often in the tea house by the west gate. He turned and left. I watched him go, my pulse racing. I had an ally. A dangerous one, but an ally nonetheless. That evening, when Chen Yang returned from the barracks, I was waiting for him in our chambers. I had ordered the maids to prepare a bath of scented oils and a spread of his favorite spicy dishes. You look better today, he said, stripping off his heavy leather breastplate. Mother says you've been helpful with the books. I didn't think a scholar's daughter would have a head for business. I only did what I could, my lord, I said, kneeling to help him with his boots. Steward Laro was very patient with me. Though, he did seem a bit worried about the grain seals. I told him not to worry, that my husband is a hero and wouldn't let anything bad happen to the family. Chen Yang's movements froze. Worried about the seals? What did he say? Oh, nothing much, I chirped, looking up at him with a look of pure, vapid adoration. Just that the northern shipments were complicated. I didn't understand it, so I just gave him a hug and told him to have a drink. Chen Yang's jaw tightened. He reached out and grabbed my chin, his thumb pressing hard against my skin. Listen to me, Wanna. You stay out of the grain business. You do the household accounts, the silk, the spices, but you don't touch the military contracts. Do you understand? I am sorry, my lord. Did I do something wrong? I let the tears spill over now, hot and genuine. I only wanted to help. You're just a girl, he spat, releasing me with a shove. You don't know the world. Just stay pretty and stay quiet. Yes, my lord, I sobbed, burying my face in my sleeves. Behind the silk of my sleeves, my eyes were dry. The seed was planted. Chen Yang now doubted his steward. Laro who now feared the new bride. And in the shadows, the sensorate was watching. The weaver had begun her work. And the first thread was already beginning to snap. The mid-autumn heat in Chang'an was a heavy, suffocating blanket, yet the air within the Yongquan manor felt like the inside of an ice cellar. I spent the following week refining my most powerful weapon, the art of the perfect, clumsy mistake. To the servants, I was a tragic figure of scholarly breeding, too delicate for the harsh realities of a general's household, constantly dropping my embroidery needles or forgetting the names of the minor concubines. Mistress, you must rest, Amai, the young maid I had chosen for her talkative nature and soft heart, whispered as she applied a cool cloth to my forehead. The dowager madam is in a foul mood today. Laro who was caught short on the poultry accounts, and she is taking it out on the laundry girls. I leaned back into the silk bolsters, my eyes fluttering shut. Oh, Amai, I feel so useless. If only I could help mother manage the stress. Is it true? Has the steward been careless again? Amai leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Careless? He's been seen at the Red Lotus Pavilion every night this week. They say he's trying to gamble back the grain taxes before the autumn audit. If the general finds out. The general is so busy with the border defenses, I sighed, playing the part of the devoted, oblivious wife. I shouldn't want to worry him with household trifles. But perhaps I should check the pantry ledgers myself. Just to ensure the girls aren't being blamed for his mistakes. Amai looked at me with pure adoration. You are too kind, mistress. A saint in a den of wolves. I was no saint. I was the one who had subtly shifted the poultry invoices during my clumsy afternoon in the accounting room, making a small surplus look like a massive deficit. I was the one who had whispered to the head cook about the fragrant quality of the new salt, knowing she would complain to the dowager about the price. By the time I walked toward the Pine Pavilion for the afternoon tea, the trap was set. The pavilion was a masterpiece of architectural arrogance, open on all sides to show off the Chen family's sprawling gardens, yet shielded by fine silk screens to keep the common air out. The dowager madam sat like a stone idol, her face clouded. Rui was beside her, looking smug. She had recovered from her illness just in time to witness my expected failure. "Wanna," the dowager barked as I entered. "The steward tells me you were asking after the pantry keys again. I thought I told you to focus on your sewing." I dropped into a deep, trembling curtsy, my hands hidden in my wide sleeves. I only wished to verify the salt prices, Mother. I heard the cook mention that we are paying double the market rate for the northern grey salt. I thought, perhaps there was a mistake in the transcription. Laro, who, standing in the shadows behind the dowager, turned a sickly shade of grey. "The mistress must have misheard," he stammered. "The northern grey is a premium grade. The transport costs alone." "Transport costs?" I asked, tilting my head with a look of wide-eyed confusion. I reached into my sleeve and pulled out a small, crumpled slip of paper, a requisition form I had found near the stables. "But this receipt from the Silver Way caravan says the salt was delivered alongside the military grain. Wouldn't that mean the transport was already paid for by the Ministry of War?" The silence that followed was so absolute I could hear the dragonflies buzzing over the pond. The dowager madam turned her head slowly toward Laro, who. Her gaze was not one of anger, but of cold, calculating appraisal. She was a merchant's daughter, she could forgive cruelty, but she could never forgive being stolen from. "Is this true, Laro, who?" she asked, her voice a low silk thread. I. "He is likely just overwhelmed, Mother," I interrupted, my voice thick with faux sympathy. I stepped forward, looking like I was on the verge of tears. "Please, don't be angry with him. I'm sure there's a perfectly logical explanation. Like the missing 10% of the winter charcoal? I found those ledgers too. It's so complicated, I'm sure he just forgot to write down where it went." Rui's smug expression shattered. She realized too late that my helpfulness was a scalpel. She reached out, trying to divert the dowager's attention. "Mother, Wanna is clearly confused. She doesn't understand the complexities of—" "Be quiet, Rui," the dowager snapped. She stood up, her jade pendants clashing. "Laro, who, bring me the inner vault keys. Now. Wanna, you will come with me. We are going to count the charcoal." As we walked toward the storage cellars, I ensured I lagged a few steps behind, looking suitably terrified of the conflict I had sparked. But as we passed a cluster of ornamental bamboo, I caught a glimpse of a tall figure standing by the library window. Lord Su Huai. He was watching the procession with an unreadable expression. As our eyes met for a fleeting second, he raised his teacup. It was a silent acknowledgement. He had seen the accidental crumpled paper. He knew exactly what I was doing. The audit of the charcoal cellar was a bloodbath. By the time the sun began to set, the dowager had discovered not only the missing fuel but a hidden cache of expensive silks that Rui had borrowed from the household gifts to pay off her personal debts. "You," the dowager screamed at Rui, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "I treated you like a daughter of this house, and you use my treasury as your personal purse. Mother, please." Rui fell to her knees, her pale face finally showing genuine terror. "It was Laro who. He told me the accounts were surplus. I didn't know." I stood in the corner, twisting my silk handkerchief into knots, the very picture of a distressed witness. "Oh, Sister Rui. I should never have mentioned the salt. This is all my fault. I am so sorry." Chen Yang arrived home just as the dowager was ordering Laro who to be taken to the back courtyard for a flogging. He looked at the chaos, his mother screaming, his cousin sobbing, and his wife cowering in the shadows, and his face darkened with a familiar, dangerous rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he roared, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. "Your heroic household is a nest of thieves," Yang, the dowager spat. "Your wife, the one you call a scholarly doll, is the only one with eyes in her head. While you were at the barracks, Rui and the steward were picking my bones clean." Chen Yang's gaze swung to me. It was a heavy, suffocating pressure. He walked toward me, his boots thudding on the stone. I shrank back, letting my shoulders shake. "You found this?" he asked, his voice a low growl. I didn't mean to, my lord," I whispered, looking up at him through my lashes. "I only wanted to make Mother proud. I didn't know it would be so horrible." He stared at me for a long time. I could see the gears turning in his head. He didn't want to believe I was clever, he wanted to believe I was a lucky fool. He needed me to be a fool. You've caused a lot of trouble today, Wanna, he said, though his grip on his sword relaxed. But it seems you've saved my mother some gold. Go to your room. I will deal with the rest. Yes, my lord, I murmured, scurrying away like a frightened mouse. But as I reached the safety of my chambers, I didn't go to bed. I waited for Amai to bring me my evening tea. When she arrived, her face was flushed with excitement. Mistress Laro, who has been dismissed, and Lady Rui has been confined to her quarters for a month. The dowager says you are to take over the keys to the inner pantry tomorrow. I smiled, a real, sharp smile that never reached my fragile eyes. That is quite a responsibility, Amai. I hope I am up to the task. The first key was won. The steward was gone, and Rui was neutralized. But the victory felt hollow in my chest. I knew that Laro, who was just a small fish. The real corruption, the grain shipments that had led to my father's death, ran much deeper, directly into the hands of the man who now shared my bed. I walked to the vanity and picked up a small, red lacquer box. Inside was a lock of my father's hair, tied with a black silk ribbon. I am coming for them, father, I whispered to the empty room. One petal at a time, I will strip this garden bare. That night, Chang'an came to me late. He smelled of wine and the iron tang of the barracks. He didn't speak, he simply pulled me to him with a roughness that spoke of his need to reassert dominance after a day of losing control. As I lay in the dark afterward, listening to his heavy, rhythmic breathing, I felt a strange sense of clarity. He thought he had conquered me. He thought he was the master of this house. He didn't realize that the fragile flower was actually a night-blooming jasmine, and my scent was a slow, intoxicating poison that was already filling his lungs. The next day, I didn't go to the pantry. I went back to the library. I knew Su Huai would be there. He was waiting by the window, a scroll in his hand. You move fast, Lady Wanna, he said without turning around. The steward is in the city jail, and the dowager is singing your praises to the neighborhood matrons. A daughter-in-law's duty is to be useful, I replied, my voice cool and devoid of its fainting lilt. Su Huai turned. His eyes were intense, searching my face for any sign of hesitation. You've gained the keys to the house. But the keys to the vault are still with the general. And the vault contains more than just gold. It contains the shipping manifests for the northern border. I know, I said. And I know that the general keeps the vault key on a chain around his neck. Even when he sleeps. Su Huai stepped closer. Then how do you plan to get it? You cannot steal it without him knowing. And if he knows, you are dead. I looked out at the koi pond, watching a single white lotus sway in the breeze. A general is a man of habits, Lord Su. He trusts his strength. He trusts his wine. And most of all, he trusts his own eyes. I turned back to him, a cold light in my gaze. I don't need to steal the key. I just need him to give it to me. And I know exactly how to make him do it. Su Huai smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of his lips. You are truly your mother's daughter, Wanna. But be careful. The general is a tiger, and even a tiger will bite if it realizes it's being led by a leash of silk. Then I shall have to ensure the silk is very, very strong, I said. As I left the library, I felt the weight of the task ahead. I had 18 years of etiquette, a mind for numbers, and a heart full of vengeance. The Chen family had no idea who they had invited across their threshold. The first act was over. The second act was about to begin. And this time, there would be no mistakes. The fall of Laro, who had left a vacuum in the manor's power structure, a hollow space that I filled with the quiet, pervasive efficiency of rising mist. Within a week, the Dowager Madam had stopped asking Rui for advice on the household accounts. Instead, she sought me out in the small, sun-drenched library, where I sat surrounded by towers of paper, looking small and overwhelmed by the complexity of the estate's management. You have a natural head for this, Wanna, the Dowager remarked one afternoon, watching as I cross-referenced the grain tax with the kitchen's flour consumption. It is a pity your mother spent so much time on your embroidery when you could have been running a merchant empire. I lowered my brush, a faint, shy blush creeping onto my cheeks. Mother always said that a lady's mind should be as orderly as her stitches, mother. I only wish to ensure that my lord's hard-earned wealth isn't wasted on dishonest men. The dowager nodded, her eyes narrowing. The seed of suspicion I had planted regarding Chen Yang's friends in the Northern Command was beginning to sprout. She was a woman who valued the family's stability above all else, and the idea that her son's military associates might be skimming from the family's private coffers was an itch she couldn't stop scratching. But my focus was not on the dowager's vanity. It was on the study at the end of the east wing, the room Chen Yang kept locked with a heavy iron bolt. Every night, after the drills were done and the wine had been served, Chen Yang would retire to that room. He didn't go there to read poetry or study maps. He went there to meet with men who arrived in the dead of night, their faces obscured by deep hoods. They were men of the border, smelling of horsehide and dry earth, and they carried scrolls sealed with the black wax of the Northern Logistics Office. "Amai," I whispered late one evening as she brushed my hair for bed. "The general's study, it seems so cold. I noticed the brazier hasn't been lit there in days. I should hate for my lord to catch a chill while he works so late." Amai paused, her reflection in the mirror looking nervous. "The general is very particular about that room, mistress. He told the servants that if anyone enters without his permission, they'll be sent to the salt mines." I let out a soft, worried sigh. How frightening. But surely, as his wife, I should ensure his comfort. Perhaps you could find out when the guard rotation changes? I could slip in and leave some warm tea and a fresh charcoal brick. He wouldn't even have to know it was me. Amai bit her lip. She was torn between her fear of the general and her devotion to the kind mistress who had recently paid for her mother's medicine. "The guards change at the third watch, mistress," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "There is a 5-minute window when the courtyard is empty. But please, be careful. The general's temper is like a summer storm. I am as quiet as a shadow, Amai. Don't worry." That night, I waited until the rhythmic, heavy snoring of Chen Yang signaled he was deep in a wine-induced slumber. I rose from the bed, my movements fluid and practiced. I didn't wear my silk robes. Instead, I donned a simple, dark inner tunic that clung to my frame like a second skin. The manor was silent, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and night-blooming jasmine. I moved through the corridors, my bare feet finding the quiet spots on the floorboards I had memorized weeks ago. When I reached the east wing, I pressed myself against the shadows, watching the 2 guards yawn and exchange a few hushed words before heading toward the kitchens for their midnight meal. The lock on the study door was sophisticated, but a lock is only as good as the man who designed it. I pulled a thin, sturdy silver hairpin from my hair, the one Su Huai had looked at so intently. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a tool, its tip filed to a precise, narrow point. Click. The sound was deafening in the silence. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The room smelled of stale tobacco and old ink. I didn't light a candle, I didn't need to. The moonlight filtered through the paper screens, casting long, skeletal shadows across the desk. I moved directly to the heavy rosewood cabinet in the corner. It was locked, of course. But the key I needed wasn't on the general's neck, not for this. I looked at the floorboards beneath the desk. One was slightly misaligned, a fraction of an inch higher than the others. I pried it up with my fingernails. There it was. A small, secondary ledger, bound in rough pigskin. I opened it, my heart racing. This wasn't a household account. It was a list of names: General Ma of the Northern Command, Governor Ju of the Western Province, and a dozen others. Beside each name was a number, and beside the number was a date. It was a record of the black grain shipments. My father had been right. They were diverting the Emperor's emergency reserves, selling them to the northern nomadic tribes during the winter droughts, and then reporting the loss as bandit raids or spoilage. The profit was staggering, enough to buy an army. Or a throne. As I scanned the pages, a cold realization settled in my gut. My father's name was there, too. But it wasn't on the list of conspirators. It was under a heading marked Obstacles Removed. Lin Dewey. 15th day of the 4th month. Silent disposal. The paper crinkled under my grip. The 15th day of the 4th month. That was the day my father had gone to the palace to report his findings, only to be intercepted and accused of the very crimes he was trying to expose. He hadn't been disgraced by a mistake, he had been executed by a system he thought he was protecting. A floorboard creaked outside. I froze. The sound was deliberate. Heavy. I shoved the ledger back into the floor, replaced the wood, and scrambled toward the window. But the door was already swinging open. A late night for a lady of such delicate constitution. It wasn't Chen Yang. Lord Su Hui stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. He wasn't wearing his official robes. He was dressed in a dark traveling cloak, a short sword strapped to his hip. He looked less like a scholar and more like a hunter. Lord Su, I whispered, my voice returning to its trembling, fragile lilt. I was only looking for a book. I couldn't sleep, and I thought. Stop it, Wanna, he interrupted, closing the door behind him. He stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on mine. The fainting bride act won't work on me. I saw you pick that lock. I've been watching you from the roof for 20 minutes. I stood my ground, my chin lifting. If you've been watching, then you know what's in that floorboard. You know what they did to my father. Su Hui sighed, the harshness in his expression softening into something resembling grief. I knew your father was murdered, Wanna. I've been trying to prove it for 3 years. But the Chen family's influence at court is a wall I haven't been able to climb. Then let me be the crack in the wall, I said, stepping toward him. I have the ledger. I have the names. But I cannot get this to the emperor alone. They would kill me before I reached the first gate. Su Hui looked at me, really looked at me. You are playing a game that ends in execution, Lin Wanna. If you give me that ledger, you are signing your own death warrant if we fail. I died the day they buried my father, I replied, my voice steady and cold. Everything I've done since then, the etiquette, the marriage, the smiles, it was all just to get to this room. If I burn, I will ensure the Chen family is the tinder. Su Hui reached out, his hand hovering near my shoulder before he pulled it back. The sensorate is meeting in 3 days for the autumn audit. If I have that ledger by then, I can force an Imperial inquiry. But I need more than just names. I need the transport seals. They are kept in the general's private vault. The key around his neck, I murmured. Yes. And he never takes it off. I looked at the window, the first hint of grey beginning to touch the horizon. He takes it off for one thing, Lord Su. When he visits the hot springs at the back of the manor. He believes the steam will tarnish the iron, so he leaves it in his robe. The springs are guarded by his personal retinue, Su Hui warned. They are men, I said, a small, sharp smile touching my lips. And men are easily distracted by a fragile flower who has accidentally wandered into the wrong courtyard. Su Hui stared at me, a mixture of horror and profound respect in his eyes. You are the most dangerous woman in Chang'an. I am a daughter who misses her father, I corrected. I reached into the floorboard, pulled out the pigskin ledger, and handed it to him. Take this. If I don't give you the seals in 48 hours, assume I am dead and use what you have. Su Hui took the book, his fingers brushing mine. I will be waiting at the Westgate tea house. Don't be late, Wanna. I don't like drinking alone. He vanished into the night as silently as he had appeared. I returned to my chambers, slipping back into bed just as the first cock crowed. Beside me, Chen Yang stirred, his arm heavy and possessive as he draped it over my waist. I lay there, my heart pounding, staring at the ceiling. The ink was on my hands now. There was no going back. The next morning, I was the picture of bridal devotion. I hand-fed Chen Yang his breakfast, laughing at his crude jokes and looking properly impressed by his tales of conquering the northern bandits. You're a good wife, Wanna, he said, wiping grease from his chin. Maybe too good for a man like me. But I like having something pretty to look at when I come home from the blood and the dirt. I only live to please you, my lord, I whispered, lowering my eyes. Tomorrow is the moon festival, he continued. I'll be home early. We'll go to the springs. Just the two of us. I think you need some color in those pale cheeks. My heart hammered against my ribs. The springs? Oh, that sounds wonderful, my lord. I shall look forward to it. As he left for the barracks, I stood at the gate, waving until his horse was out of sight. My hand was steady, my smile was perfect, and my mind was already sharpening the needle. The second petal was about to fall. And this one would be stained with blood. The moon festival had arrived, bringing with it a deceptive sense of peace. The streets of Chang'an were alive with the glow of paper lanterns and the scent of sweet osmanthus cakes, but inside the Yongquan manor, the air felt thin, as if the very oxygen were being drained away by the weight of my anticipation. I spent the afternoon in my chambers, preparing for the evening with a meticulousness that bordered on the ritualistic. I chose a robe of pale, translucent silk, the color of morning mist, and allowed Amai to pin my hair with a single, heavy jade comb. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who appeared to be made of glass, ready to shatter at a touch. "Mistress, you look otherworldly," Amai whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. She knew I was playing a game, even if she didn't know the stakes. "It is a night for spirits and shadows, Amai," I replied, my voice a soft, hollow chime. "Go to the kitchen. Ensure the general's favorite spiced wine is heated to exactly the right temperature. He will be thirsty when we return from the springs." As she scurried away, I reached into the hidden compartment of my jewelry box and pulled out a small, wax-sealed vial. It contained a tincture of nightshade and mandrake, not enough to kill, but enough to induce a deep, heavy stupor that would mimic the effects of too much wine and heat. I tucked it into the folds of my sash, my fingers steady. Chen Yang returned from the barracks earlier than usual, his face flushed with the pride of a man who believed the world was at his feet. He looked at me, standing in the center of the room like a ghost of a bride, and his eyes darkened with a predatory hunger. "You've finally grown some color in your cheeks, Wanna," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The moon suits you." "I only wish to be a credit to your house, my lord," I murmured, lowering my eyes. The hot springs were located at the furthest edge of the manor, a secluded pavilion built over a natural thermal vent. The water bubbled and steamed, the air thick with the scent of sulfur and minerals. The general's personal guards stood at the entrance, their faces obscured by the shadows of the overhanging willow trees. "Wait here," Chen Yang commanded the guards as we reached the pavilion. "I am not to be disturbed. If anyone approaches, treat them as an assassin." "Yes, General." We entered the steam-filled chamber. The sound of the water was a constant, rhythmic pulsing, like the heartbeat of the earth. Chen Yang began to strip off his heavy outer robes, his movements confident and careless. I watched as he reached for the iron chain around his neck, the one that held the key to the vault. He paused, looking at the heavy iron link. "The steam will tarnish it," he muttered, more to himself than to me. He unhooked the chain and laid it on a low stone bench, draped beneath his discarded tunic. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "There it is. Come, Wanna," he said, stepping into the churning water. "The heat will melt the scholarly chill from your bones." I stepped into the water, the heat a sudden, shocking embrace. I moved toward him, my movements fluid and submissive. I allowed him to pull me close, to let the steam obscure our faces. As we sat in the silence, I reached for the flask of wine I had brought, the one I had spiked in the shadows of the changing room. "To your health, my lord," I whispered, holding the cup to his lips. "And to the prosperity of the Chen family." He drank deeply, the spiced wine masking the bitter tang of the tincture. He laughed, a harsh, triumphant sound. "Prosperity? We are beyond prosperity, Wanna. We are building an empire. By next spring, the emperor will have no choice but to name me Grand Marshal." "You are a visionary, my lord," I murmured, leaning my head against his shoulder. Within minutes, the tincture began to take effect. His movements became sluggish, his voice dropping into a slurred, rhythmic drone. He leaned back against the stone edge of the pool, his eyes fluttering shut. So tired," he muttered. "The heat, it's more than usual." "Rest, my lord," I whispered, my voice a soothing lullaby. "I am here. No one will disturb you." I waited until his breathing became heavy and rhythmic, the deep, unshakable sleep of the drugged. I moved silently out of the water, the cold air of the pavilion a sharp contrast to the heat of the pool. My silk robes clung to my body, but I didn't care. I moved toward the stone bench. I reached beneath his tunic and felt the cold, hard weight of the iron chain. My fingers closed around the key. Click. I didn't take the chain. I took a small piece of soft wax I had hidden in my palm and pressed the key into it, making a perfect, deep impression of the intricate wards. It was a risk. A wax mold was never as good as the original, but I couldn't risk him waking up and finding the key missing. As I was finishing the mold, a shadow fell across the entrance of the pavilion. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I shoved the wax into my sash and grabbed a towel, wrapping it around my shoulders just as the screen door slid open. "Mistress, the general's wine is." It was Amai. She stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with terror as she saw me standing over the general's discarded clothes, my hair dripping and my expression cold and sharp. "Amai," I whispered, my voice a low, dangerous hiss. "What are you doing here?" The general said no one was to enter. I thought. I heard a sound, she stammered, her gaze flickering to the sleeping form of Chang'an. Is he dead?" "He is sleeping," I said, stepping toward her. I reached out and grabbed her arm, my grip like iron. "And you are going to forget everything you saw tonight. Do you understand? If you speak a word of this, the general will not be the one you have to fear. It will be me." Amai looked at me, and for the first time, she saw the fragile flower vanish. She saw the predator beneath the silk. She nodded slowly, her face as pale as the moon outside. "Good. Now, go. Tell the guards the general is resting and does not wish to be disturbed for another hour." As she scurried away, I returned to the water. I slipped back into the heat, my heart still racing. I waited until the tincture began to wear off, until Chang'an started to stir and groan. "Wana," he muttered, rubbing his eyes. How long was I out?" "Only a few minutes, my lord," I said, offering him a fresh cup of unspiked wine. "The heat must have been more potent than you realized. You were snoring like a dragon." He laughed, though he looked dazed and confused. "A dragon? Yes. I suppose I was. Let's go back. The moon is setting." As we walked back to the manor, I felt the heavy weight of the wax mold against my hip. I had the key. Or at least, I had the shape of it. The next morning, I sent a message to the Westgate tea house. It wasn't a letter, it was a single, white lotus flower, its stem broken and tied with a black silk ribbon. 2 hours later, I met Su Huai in the shadowed corner of the tea house. I handed him the wax mold, my hands still trembling with the after-effects of the adrenaline. "The vault seals," I whispered. "This is the key. Can you make a copy?" Su Huai took the wax, his eyes scanning the intricate detail of the impression. "It's a masterpiece, Wana. But a copy will take time. The sensorate audit is tomorrow. If I don't have the seals by then, the ledger won't be enough to convict him." "Then you must hurry," I said. "The general is becoming suspicious. He asked me this morning if I had moved his tunic last night. I told him the wind must have caught it, but he didn't look convinced." Su Huai looked at me, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. "You are walking on a razor's edge, Wana. If he finds out what you've done, then I shall have to ensure he doesn't find out until it's too late," I replied. As I left the tea house, I felt the eyes of the city on me. To them, I was just a beautiful, fragile bride out for a morning stroll. They had no idea that I was carrying the fuse that would ignite a firestorm in the heart of the empire. The third petal was falling. And the garden was beginning to burn. The day of the autumn audit dawned with a sky the color of a bruised plum. Heavy, iron-gray clouds hung low over the tiled roofs of Chang'an, threatening a downpour that mirrored the rising storm within the walls of the Yongquan manor. I awoke to the sound of hushed, frantic voices in the hallway and the sharp, metallic clatter of armor. Chang'an was already dressed in his full ceremonial regalia, gold-inlaid scales that caught the dim morning light, making him look like a monstrous, gilded serpent. He was pacing the length of our bedchamber, his hand white-knuckled around the hilt of his sword. "The sensorate is arriving 3 hours early," he barked, not looking at me as I sat up, clutching the silk sheets to my chest in a display of sleepy confusion. "Su Huai has called for an immediate inspection of the logistics wing. Someone has been whispering in the emperor's ear, Wana. Someone has been feeding them lies about the northern grain." I let out a soft, frightened gasp, my hand flying to my mouth. "Lies? But my lord, you are a hero. Who would dare to slander the man who keeps the borders safe? He stopped pacing and turned to me, his eyes bloodshot and narrowed with a burgeoning, frantic suspicion. That is what I intend to find out. And when I do, I will not bother with a trial. I will pull their tongue out with my bare hands. He walked to the vanity, his gaze falling on the iron chain around his neck. He reached up and touched the key, his fingers tracing the wards. I held my breath, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. Had the wax left a residue? Had the wind story from the hot springs finally rotted into a confession in his mind? "Wanna," he said, his voice dropping to a low, vibrating hum. "You were in the library late last night. I told the guards you were looking for a book on medicinal herbs for Rui." I was, my lord," I whispered, my voice trembling perfectly. "Sister Rui's cough has returned, and I thought a tea of dried pear blossoms might help. I didn't mean to disturb your work." He stepped closer, the scent of cold metal and old wine radiating from him. He reached out and grabbed a handful of my hair, tilting my head back so I was forced to look into the abyss of his rage. "If I find out you've been anywhere near my private ledgers, if I find out you've spoken to Su Huai behind my back, I will forget that you are a Lin. Do you understand me?" I only live to serve you, my lord," I sobbed, the tears streaming down my face. "Please, you're hurting me." He stared at me for a long beat, searching for the crack in the porcelain. Then, with a grunt of disgust, he released me. "Get dressed. The Dowager expects you to host the Sensorate's wives in the inner garden while the audit is conducted. Keep them distracted. If a single word of this reaches the social circles before I've cleared my name, it will be your head on the block next to mine." "Yes, my lord," I moaned, collapsing back onto the pillows as he stormed out. The moment the door slammed shut, the tears dried. I scrambled out of bed, my movements sharp and clinical. I had less than an hour. Su Huai would be entering the manor through the front gates with a literal army of clerks, but he needed the physical seals from the vault to make the treason charge stick. The ledger was the map, the seals were the weapon. I dressed in a robe of deep, somber indigo, its high collar hiding the faint red marks Chen Yang's fingers had left on my neck. I didn't call for Amai. I knew she was currently being questioned by the general's head of security. I had to assume she would break. I had to assume my time was measured in minutes. I moved toward the east wing, not as a bride, but as a shadow. The manor was in chaos, servants running with trays of tea, guards shifting to block the administrative offices. I used the back service stairs, the ones used for carrying charcoal and waste, to reach the corridor outside Chen Yang's private vault. The vault was a masterpiece of northern engineering, a door of solid iron set into the mountain stone that formed the back of the manor. There were 2 guards, but they were distracted by the sound of the sensorate's drums at the main gate. "The master says no one enters," one guard shouted to a passing servant. I stepped out from behind a pillar, my face a mask of pale, breathless urgency. "Guards! Quickly! The Dowager! She has collapsed in the pine pavilion. She is calling for the general, but he is at the gate. You must go, fetch the physician from the west wing." The guards hesitated. They knew their orders, but the Dowager was the true power in the inner court. If she died while they stood watch over a pile of gold, they would be buried with her. "Go!" I screamed, stumbling forward as if my legs were failing. "I will stay here. No one will pass. Just go." They broke. The fear of the Dowager outweighed the fear of the general. As they sprinted down the hallway, I pulled the duplicate key from my sash, the one Su Huai's smith had forged in the dead of night from my wax mold. My hands shook as I slid the iron into the lock. Please let it turn. Grind. Click. The heavy iron door groaned as it swung open. The air inside was cold and smelled of ozone and ancient paper. I didn't look at the chests of gold or the racks of silk. I went directly to the small ivory box on the central pedestal. Inside were the Imperial transport seals, heavy blocks of jade carved with the Emperor's own cipher. They were used to authorize the movement of grain from the state granaries. If they were here, in a private vault, it was proof that Chen Yang hadn't just been skimming, he had been stealing the very authority of the throne. I grabbed the seals, wrapping them in a scrap of dark velvet. As I turned to leave, I saw something else in the back of the box. A small, wooden cylinder, sealed with my father's private signet. My breath caught. I tucked it into my sleeve alongside the seals. I stepped out of the vault and pulled the door shut, the lock snapping back into place just as the sound of returning footsteps echoed in the gallery. I didn't run, I couldn't. I smoothed my robes, lowered my head, and began to walk toward the inner garden, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The inner garden was filled with the wives of the high officials, women in silks of every color, their fans fluttering like the wings of trapped butterflies. They were whispering, their eyes darting toward the administrative wing where the shouting had already begun. Lady Wanna, the wife of the Minister of Works, said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "You look quite pale. Is it true? Are the censors here for a routine check, or is there trouble?" "The general's books are as open as his heart, Lady Feng," I said, my voice steady and sweet as I poured the tea. My hands did not shake, even though the heavy jade seals were pressing against my thigh. "He welcomes the audit. It is a chance to show the Emperor how much we have sacrificed for the borders." As I spoke, I caught sight of a servant standing by the moon gate. It was Su Huai's personal attendant, disguised in the Chen livery. I walked toward the edge of the pavilion, ostensibly to check on the lotus blooms. "The wind is picking up," I murmured, leaning over the stone railing. "The petals are falling." I felt the weight leave my sleeve as I dropped the velvet-wrapped package into the servant's waiting basket of discarded weeds. He bowed low and vanished into the shrubbery. It was done. The weapon was in Su Huai's hands. I returned to the table, taking my seat beside the dowager. She looked at me, her eyes sharp and suspicious. "Where have you been, Wanna? Your tea is cold." "I was merely checking on your medicine, Mother," I said, offering her a brilliant, fragile smile. "The stress of the day is not good for your humors." Suddenly, a roar echoed from the main hall, a sound of pure, masculine fury that made the birds take flight from the willow trees. It was Chen Yang. "Treason," his voice bellowed. "You dare to accuse a general of the Empire based on a forged ledger?" "The ledger is not forged, General Chen," Su Huai's voice rose, calm and cold as a mountain stream. "And the seals found in your possession match the unauthorized shipments to the northern tribes perfectly. Guards! By order of the sensorate, arrest this man." The garden descended into chaos. The wives shrieked, clutching their fans to their chests. The dowager stood up, her face turning a sickly, mottled purple. "Yang!" she screamed, stumbling toward the gate. I stood up, but I didn't run toward the noise. I stood perfectly still in the center of the pavilion, the wind whipping my indigo robes around my legs. I felt a strange, cold peace. The tower was falling, and I was the only one who knew where the stones would land. Chen Yang burst into the garden, his sword drawn and stained with the blood of a sensorate guard who had tried to stop him. He looked like a demon, his golden armor splattered with red. His eyes scanned the crowd, bypassing his mother, bypassing the screaming noblewomen, and locking onto me. "You," he hissed, the word a spray of venom. He lunged toward me, the steel of his blade whistling through the air. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I watched the death in his eyes and felt nothing but a quiet, searing triumph. "General, stop." Su Huai's voice rang out as he and a dozen black-clad soldiers flooded the garden. Chen Yang froze, the tip of his sword inches from my throat. He looked at me, and in that second, he saw it. He saw the fragile flower vanish. He saw the daughter of Lin Jui standing before him, her eyes as hard as the jade seals he had lost. "It was you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "All the tears, all the fainting. You hollowed me out from the inside." "A flower doesn't fight the storm, my lord," I said, my voice a cold, clear bell that cut through the screams of the garden. "It drinks the rainwater. And today, I am very thirsty." The soldiers tackled him, slamming the lion of the north into the dirt. As they dragged him away, his screams for vengeance echoed against the stone walls of the manor, fading into the sound of the rising rain. Su Huai walked toward me, his face pale and etched with exhaustion. He looked at the marks on my neck, then at the stillness of my hands. "It's over, Wanna," he said softly. "The sensorate has the evidence. The Emperor has been notified." I didn't answer. I reached into my sleeve and pulled out the wooden cylinder I had taken from the vault. I opened it, my fingers trembling for the first time. Inside was a single sheet of paper, my father's final letter, written in the hours before his arrest. To my daughter, the willow. When the great oaks fall, you will still be standing. Do not seek revenge for my life, seek justice for the truth. The world is a garden, Wana. Be the one who decides what blooms. I looked up at Su Huai, the first teardrop of the day finally falling, not a tear of fragility, but a tear of release. I am ready to go home now, Lord Su, I said. But as I turned to leave the ruins of the Chen family, I saw Liu Rui standing by the pond. She wasn't crying. She was staring at me with a look of such profound, poisonous hatred that I knew the garden wasn't quite empty yet. The fifth petal had fallen. But the thorns were still sharp. The arrest of General Chen Yang sent a shockwave through the capital that made the very foundations of the Imperial palace seem to tremble. By the following morning, the Yongquan Manor, once a fortress of military prestige and unearned opulence, had been transformed into a labyrinth of seals, investigators, and the hollow echoes of a fallen dynasty. I stood in the center of the main courtyard, the cold autumn rain washing away the scent of incense and old secrets. I was no longer wearing the heavy silks of a general's wife. I had returned to a simple robe of unadorned white, the color of mourning, and the color of a blank page. The inventory is nearly complete, Lady Lin, Su Huai said, stepping out from the administrative wing. His official robes were dampened by the mist, and the dark circles beneath his eyes spoke of a night spent cataloguing the extent of the Chen family's betrayal. The treasury has seized the illegal grain profits. The dowager has been moved to the family's ancestral village under house arrest. As for Chen Yang, he paused, his gaze softening as it lingered on my face. He is in the high-security cells of the Ministry of Justice, I finished for him, my voice as steady as the falling rain. He is waiting for the Emperor's brush to sign his death warrant. He is, Su Huai confirmed. But there is a complication. The Northern Command is in an uproar. Many of the junior officers were loyal to him, not to the throne. They are claiming the evidence was planted by a vengeful, scholar-bred wife and a jealous censor. I looked up at the grey sky, a small, cold smile touching my lips. Let them claim what they wish. The jade seals do not lie. The ledger in my father's hand does not lie. If they want to blame a fragile flower for the collapse of their wall, let them. It only proves how weak the wall truly was. Su Huai stepped closer, his presence a grounding force in the chaos. The Emperor has requested your presence at the final hearing. He wants to see the woman who did what 100 spies could not. But Wana, once you step into that light, the mask is gone forever. You will never be the fragile flower again. You will be a target. I have been a target since I was 9 years old, Lord Su, I replied. At least now, I can see the archers. But as I prepared to leave the manor for the final time, a servant approached me, her face pale with terror. It was Amai, her eyes red from weeping. Mistress. Lady Rui. She refuses to leave the inner pavilion. She says she has a final gift for you. She says if you don't come, she will burn the remaining Lin family records she hid under her floorboards. My heart skipped a beat. My father's academic papers, the ones the Chen family had confiscated to ensure his legacy was erased. I had thought they were lost to the damp or the rats. I will go, I said, ignoring the warning hand Su Huai placed on my arm. It's a trap, Wana, he hissed. I know. But I will not leave my father's words in her hands. I walked toward the inner pavilion, the air growing thick with the scent of something sweet and cloying. As I entered Rui's chambers, I found the white lotus sitting in the center of the room. She was no longer pale or coughing. She was dressed in her finest scarlet silks, her face painted with a garish, desperate beauty. In her hand, she held a flickering candle. At her feet lay a stack of yellowed, fragile scrolls, my father's life's work. You think you've won, don't you? Rui asked, her voice no longer a thin reed, but a jagged shard of glass. You think because you sent Yang to the block, you can just walk away and be the great Lady Lin again? I don't want to be a great lady, Rui, I said, stopping a few paces from her. I just want what belongs to my family. Put the candle down. Rui laughed, a sound that bordered on the manic. You played us all. You sat at our table, you drank our tea, And you smiled while you sharpened the knife. You're more of a monster than Yang ever was. At least his cruelty was honest. Yours is a slow rot. My father was an honest man, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, low frequency. And your family murdered him for a few sacks of grain and a title. If that makes me a monster, then I am a monster of your making. Rui tilted the candle, a drop of hot wax falling onto the top scroll. I flinched, but I didn't move toward her. I knew she wanted me to lung, she wanted an excuse to drop the flame. Yang loved me once, she whispered, her eyes glassing over with a delusional grief. Before you came with your perfect etiquette and your fragile size. He promised me I would be the mistress of this house. Now, I have nothing. No name, no dowry, no future. So why should you have your past? Because the past is the only thing that can't be burned, Rui, I said. I took a step forward, my eyes locking onto hers. I didn't use the victim voice. I used the voice of the woman who had picklocked a general's vault. You can burn the paper. But I have the words memorized. I have the truth in my blood. And if you drop that candle, I will ensure the Ministry of Justice hears about the special medicines you bought with stolen military funds. You won't just be exiled, you'll be executed as a co-conspirator. Rui's hand trembled. The flame flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across her face. You wouldn't. You need me to prove you were a victim. I am not a victim, I said, taking another step. I am the judge. And I am tired of your games, Rui. Give me the scrolls, and I will let you walk out of this city with enough gold to start a new life in the south. Stay here, and you die with the Chen name. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could hear the crackle of the wick, the drip of the wax. Rui looked at the scrolls, then at me. For a moment, I saw the girl she might have been if she hadn't been raised in a house of vipers. Then, the hatred returned. I'd rather burn with the truth than live on your charity, she spat. She dropped the candle. The dry paper ignited instantly. I lunged forward, ignoring the heat, my hands clawing at the burning scrolls. I managed to kick the candle away, but the fire was already climbing the silk hangings. Wanna! Su Huai burst into the room, his cloak dampening the flames as he threw it over the pile of scrolls. He pulled me back, his hands firm on my shoulders. The room was filling with smoke, the scent of burning ink and ancient dreams stinging my eyes. Rui stood in the corner, laughing, her scarlet silks catching the light of the dying embers. Go! Su Huai shouted to the guards. Get the water. I fell to my knees beside the charred remains of the scrolls. Most were ruined, blackened ash that crumbled at a touch. But in the center, protected by the heavy outer casing, was a single, intact cylinder. I pulled it out, my fingers scorched and soot-stained. I didn't care about the pain. I opened it and saw my father's seal. It was his final treatise on the ethics of governance, the very document that had made him a target. It had survived. I looked up at Rui. She was being dragged out by the guards, her screams of traitor fading as they moved her toward the courtyard. Su Huai knelt beside me, his face grimed with smoke. He reached out and touched my scorched hand, his fingers gentle. You almost died for a piece of paper, Wanna. It's not paper, I whispered, clutching the scroll to my chest. It's my father's voice. And as long as I have it, the Chen family hasn't won. Su Huai helped me to my feet. We walked out of the burning pavilion, the cold rain a welcome relief against our heated skin. As we reached the gate of the Yongquan Manor, I stopped and looked back. The smoke was rising into the grey sky, a black ribbon that signaled the end of a decade of lies. The fragile flower was gone, burned away in the fire of her own making. What now? Su Huai asked as the carriage pulled up. I looked at the charred scroll in my hand, then at the bustling streets of Chang'an, where life was already moving on, oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded behind these stone walls. Now, I said, I build a garden where the flowers have thorns. I reopen the Lin Academy. And I teach every girl in this city that she doesn't have to wait for a hero to save her. She just needs to learn how to read the ledgers. Su Huai smiled, a look of such profound, quiet devotion that it made my heart ache in a way Chen Yang's roughness never could. Then I suppose I shall have to apply for a position as a guest lecturer. I have a fair bit of experience with confusing numbers. I'll consider it, Lord Su, I said, stepping into the carriage. But you'll have to prove you can keep up with the mistress. As the carriage pulled away, leaving the ruins of the Chen family behind, I felt the heavy weight of the past finally lift. I was Lin Wanna. I was the daughter of a scholar. I was the architect of a ruin. And for the first time in 18 years, I was free. The Imperial court of Chang'an was a forest of gold-leafed pillars and silken shadows, a place where whispered rumors held more weight than unsheathed steel. Today, the air was thick with the scent of ceremonial incense and the sharp, metallic tang of tension. I stood at the base of the great hall, my white mourning robes a stark, defiant contrast to the vibrant jades and vermilions of the gathered officials. I did not kneel with my head bowed in the way a broken widow should. I stood with my spine a cord of tempered steel, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes, some pitying, some suspicious, and many burning with the cold heat of a predator who had realized the prey had fangs. "Bring in the prisoner," the high censor commanded, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The heavy iron doors at the rear of the hall groaned open. The sound of dragging chains followed, a rhythmic, jagged scraping that set my teeth on edge. Chen Yang was led in by 4 Imperial guards. He was no longer the Lion of the North. His golden armor had been stripped away, replaced by the coarse, grey hemp of a traitor. His hair, once pinned with jade, hung in matted clumps over a face that was a roadmap of desperation and fury. As he reached the center of the hall, his gaze locked onto mine. For a heartbeat, the fragile flower mask flickered in my mind, the urge to shrink back a ghost of 18 years of training. But then I felt the charred scroll of my father's treatise pressing against my ribs, hidden in the folds of my sleeve. I did not flinch. I looked at him with a gaze as clear and cold as a winter well. "General Chen Yang," the emperor's voice drifted down from the dragon throne, shrouded behind a curtain of beaded pearls. "You stand accused of high treason, the theft of imperial grain, and the extrajudicial murder of scholar Lin Dewey. How do you plead?" Chen Yang's laugh was a dry, rattling sound. He didn't look at the throne, he looked only at me. "I plead that I was a fool, Your Majesty. I brought a viper into my bed and called it a lily. This woman, this creature, she forged the ledgers. She stole the seals. She is the daughter of a traitor seeking to clear a dead man's name by blackening a hero's reputation." A murmur rippled through the hall. Some officials shifted uncomfortably. Chen Yang's military record was still a formidable shield, and the idea of a scheming wife was a story they were all too eager to believe. Lord Su Hui stepped forward, his blue robes shimmering like deep water. "The general speaks of forgeries, yet the seals found in his private vault match the impressions on the grain manifests perfectly. And as for the traitorous scholar Lin..." Su Hui turned to me, a silent invitation in his eyes. I stepped forward, my footsteps making no sound on the polished marble. I reached into my sleeve and pulled out the charred wooden cylinder. I held it aloft, the soot-stained wood catching the light. "This," I said, my voice ringing out with a clarity that startled even the high censors, "is the final work of my father, Lin Dewey. It was saved from the fire started by Liu Rui in her attempt to erase the truth. In it, my father details the exact route of the black grain trade, the same route General Chen has used for a decade." I walked toward the high censor, handing him the cylinder. "My father did not die because he was a traitor. He died because he was a mirror, and the general could not bear to see his own reflection. For 10 years, I have worn the mask of a fragile girl. I have bowed, I have fainted, and I have wept. I did this so that I could enter the house of the man who killed my father and find the truth he buried." I turned back to Chen Yang, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire hall. "You thought you bought a flower to decorate your hall, my lord. You didn't realize that some flowers grow best in the dark, and their roots go deep enough to pull down mountains." The high censor opened the cylinder, his eyes scanning the fragile, burnt edges of the paper. After a long, agonizing silence, he looked up at the dragon throne. "The handwriting is undeniably that of Scholar Lin, Your Majesty. And the details, they align perfectly with the recent seizures at the northern border." The emperor did not speak for a long time. The only sound was the distant tolling of a temple bell. Then, a hand emerged from behind the pearl curtain, signaling the verdict. General Chen Yang is stripped of his rank, his titles, and his lands, the emperor's voice proclaimed, cold and final. He is sentenced to death by 1,000 cuts, his name to be erased from the military annals. The Chen family manor is to be razed, and the land returned to the crown. Chen Yang lunged forward, the chains snapping taut as he tried to reach me. Wanna. I will find you in the next life. I will. The guards slammed the pommels of their swords into his back, forcing him to the ground. As they dragged him away, his screams of viper and traitor faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. But the emperor was not finished. Lin Wanna, the voice continued. You have performed a service to the empire that transcends the duties of a wife or a subject. Your father's titles are restored posthumously. The Lin Academy is granted imperial patronage. And for your bravery, you are granted a decree of independence. No man, neither husband, nor father, nor brother shall have authority over your person or your wealth. A gasp went up from the hall. A woman with a decree of independence was a rarity in Chang'an, a creature of pure, unadulterated agency. I dropped into a deep, final curtsy. I am humbled by your majesty's justice. As I walked out of the imperial court, the sunlight broke through the clouds, turning the damp stones of the plaza into a sea of diamonds. Su Huai was waiting for me at the bottom of the steps. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see a daughter or a strategist. He saw a woman who was finally breathing her own air. The academy opens in a month, he said, his voice warm. I've already had the library cleared of the suit. And the guest lecturer position? I asked, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. Su Huai bowed low, a playful glint in his eyes. I am awaiting the mistress's formal invitation. I promise to be a very obedient student. We shall see, Lord Su, I said, stepping into my own carriage, one that bore the crane and plum blossom seal of the Lin family, not the hawk of the Chen. As the carriage pulled away, I looked back at the Imperial palace. The Chen family was a memory, a stain that had been scrubbed clean. Liu Rui was on a cart headed for the southern labor camps. Chen Yang was in a cell waiting for the dawn. And I was heading home to a house where the windows were open, the ledgers were clear, and the only person I had to please was the woman in the mirror. The fragile flower had finally finished her dance. And in her place, a forest was beginning to grow. 3 years have passed since the iron gates of the Yongquan Manor were melted down to forge imperial plowshares. In Chang'an, memories are as short as the spring blossoms, but the name Lin Wanna has become a permanent fixture in the city's lexicon, not as a tragic widow, but as the Iron Lily of the West District. The Lin Academy stands where a corrupt warehouse once loomed. It is a sprawling complex of white stone and weeping willows, its halls filled with the melodic chant of students reciting the ethics of governance. I sit in the central pavilion, the very spot where I once fainted to deceive a general. Now, I sit with my back straight, a cup of bitter tea in my hand, watching the next generation of scholars learn that the brush is mightier than the spear. My mother, Lady Lin Maihua, sits across from me. Her hair has silvered, but her eyes have regained the spark they lost the day my father was taken. She no longer teaches the daughters of nobility how to bow to their husbands, she teaches them how to manage their own estates and read the fine print of a marriage contract. You look peaceful, Wanna, she murmurs, her fingers tracing the edge of a fresh ledger. I am free, mother, I reply. Peace is a luxury, freedom is a necessity. The fate of my enemies has been sealed by the very karma they cultivated. Chen Yang's name was struck from the imperial records, his execution serving as a grim warning to any officer who thought the emperor's grain was theirs to sell. The dowager madam, stripped of her finery, spent her final days in a remote village, haunted by the silence of a house that no longer feared her voice. As for Liu Rui, she was seen 2 winters ago in a southern labor camp, her fragile health proving surprisingly resilient when faced with the necessity of hard labor. She no longer coughs for attention, she breathes the dusty air of the mines, a forgotten shadow of a forgotten era. A shadow falls across the stone table. I don't need to look up to know who it is. The scent of sandalwood and old parchment precedes him. The northern audit is complete, Mistress Lin, Lord Su Huai says, stepping into the pavilion. He is now the High Censor, the most powerful investigator in the empire, yet he still carries himself with the quiet humility of a student. The trade routes are clear. The grain is reaching the people. And I found this in the archives of the Ministry of Works. He lays a small, jade-encrusted box on the table. Inside is a single, golden hairpin, the phoenix pin I wore on my wedding day, the one I had used to pick the lock of a traitor's heart. I thought you might want to melt it down, he says, his eyes meeting mine. There is no pity in them, only a deep, enduring respect. No, I say, picking up the pin. I look at its sharp point, the gold reflecting the afternoon sun. I shall keep it. It serves as a reminder that even the most beautiful ornament can be a weapon if held by the right hand. Su Huai smiles, a slow, private look that speaks of years of shared secrets and unspoken promises. We are not married. The decree of independence remains my most cherished possession. But he is the first person I invite to walk in my garden when the moon is high, and he is the only one who knows that I still keep a small piece of charcoal beneath my pillow to draw maps of the future. Will you walk with me, Wana? He asks, extending a hand. I look at his hand, strong, steady, and open. I do not take it to be led. I take it as an equal. Only if you can keep up, Lord Su, I say. As we walk through the gates of the academy, the scholars bow. Not to a fragile flower, but to a woman who looked at the storm and told it to move. The wind in Chang'an is cool today, carrying the scent of ink and the promise of a long, quiet evening. My father's name is restored. My mother's smile is returned. And I, Lin Wana, have finally learned that the most beautiful thing a woman can grow in her garden is her own power. Tell me which moment shocked you the most or touched your heart the deepest. Your comments mean the world to me, they help me keep creating more stories like this. Please like, subscribe, and share. Your support keeps Lotus Tale Studios alive. See you in the next story.